Well, hello, party people. I'm just going to apologize already. Welcome to the most exciting presentation video, etc. of your life. Strap in, boys and girls, and men and women. If there's any, lizard people listening, you know who you are. Controlling the government. I see you, Illuminati. Anyway, Unit 4. Unit 4 takes place during the same time as Unit 3. It's got a ton of information on it, and it's one of the most testable of all of the 9 units in WHAP. 12 to 15% of the AP test will come from Unit 4. So, because of that, I'm going to have to break up Unit 4 into a few different videos. This will be video 1, as you already saw from the title screen, friends. Okay, let's keep going. So the first part, those of you in my class, this is big time a review, right? We've talked a ton about the different technology, and this is a pretty short one here, but if I can give an overview before we look at the really specific things. This technological innovations that occurred in Europe, they don't happen in a vacuum, right? They're going to come from earlier interactions, and some of them come from Europe themselves, but some of them are improving on other technologies, so you'll have to talk about and be able to answer questions, be able to write about the different ways that new technology or old technology was diffused into Europe and how that technology helped with maritime, which is just basically ocean expansion, maritime exploration. And some of these are really obvious, like a compass, right? A better ship, a better sail. If you have better ships and better sails and a compass, obviously it's better for you to move, or it's easier for you to explore and move from one place to the other. What the WHAP test is really going to ask, though, is there's a few specifics that you could use as examples and evidence when you're writing a paper, but really they're looking at the diffusion of it, right? So these earlier patterns like the Crusades, the Pax Mongolica, trade, etc., the Islamic world, the way information moves from the Islamic world into the formerly Islamic Spain, etc. This new technology and old technology is going to diffuse into Europe. How does it diffuse and what gets diffused? And could you explain how that diffusion helps with the exploration and expansion? I bet you can. I spent too long on this slide already. This is not a good start. Let's look at our first learning objective. Ooh, look at that nice, bluish purple blurple. The first learning objective, explain how cross-cultural interactions, trade, crusade, Pax Mongolica, etc., resulted in the diffusion of technology and facilitated changes in patterns of trade and travel. You'll notice that throughout this, I underline kind of your action-y words here. I'll bold and color the specific nouns that you need to know about that were affected and changed. There's not really a strict method to it. The colors are going to change. Sometimes I underline, sometimes I don't. I'm just kind of making it look interesting, so don't read too much into it or read way too much into it. Maybe do that. Maybe keep life interesting, you know? Yeah. Would you like for me to go through some specific technologies? Oh, of course you would. Thank you. So anyway, this is from Freemanpedia. Freemanpedia's images are going to be all over this PowerPoint and video. So thank you. I think his name's Ben Freeman. If you haven't checked out Freemanpedia, one, if you're my student, what the heck are you doing? Because I talk about it all the time. But he makes great graphics. And so here is kind of the earlier technologies that diffused, and we're going into, Unit 3, which takes place the same time as Unit 4, because we're looking at Zhonghe here. Thank you, my Mandarin's perfect. Moving on. What's a historical development that goes with that learning objective? Knowledge, scientific learning, and technology. So knowledge, scientific learning, technology. Yeah, I know knowledge is kind of like all of that anyway, but it's okay. Don't tell College Board. Knowledge, scientific learning, and technology from the classical, which means before the Middle Ages, Islamic, so Darul Islam broadly, and Asian worlds. Wait, Mr. Davenport, isn't a lot of the Islamic world in the Asian world? And wasn't Asia in the classical world? Yes, it's not the best historical development here. They probably just could have said from the past, but oh well. Spread, facilitating European technological developments and innovations. Now, I could go through examples of each one of these on this slide, but I'm not going to do that because I have some specific ones that College Board wants you to know about. So some examples of technological influences from these different parts of the world: the lateen sail, the compass, and astronomical charts. There are more, which I'll get into in the next slide too. But the lateen sail, simply put, it's a triangular sail. When you put this triangular sail that could tack into the wind and you team it up with the stern post rudder. Lateen sail coming out of the Indian Ocean, originally created in the classical world in the Mediterranean, but then improved upon in the Islamic world. So I've already hit all three of those things. It's going to be improved in the Indian Ocean trade, and then Europeans, you're going to see they take these sails and they adopt them to their newer ships. Now, they won't just all have lateen sails. They'll have a variety of sails, but you can clearly see, hey, this idea diffused from the Mediterranean into the Indian Ocean and then diffused back to Europe, Mediterranean being partially Europe, diffused back to Europe. And what do you know? There's improvements on this. And that's what College Board really likes to see, right? These continuities, these changes, etc. The compass. So the compass is coming probably from China, definitely East Asia, right? The magnetic compass. It's pretty much attributed to China now, but some argue it's from Korea. Anyway, East Asia and China, you'd get credit for either one. I think it's pretty obvious how a compass is going to help in navigation and expansion. If it's not, man. Anyway, the one you might not think about, though, is astronomical charts. Now, these are charts dealing with basically the sky, el cielo, for those native speakers of my parent language, Espanol. Astronomical charts are going to help a lot because using tools like the astrolabe, are understanding really what constellations are where during what time of year in the night sky, especially in the southern hemisphere. For those of you who don't know, there are 88 constellations, 44 in the northern that you can see in the northern hemisphere, 44 in the southern. Europeans go to the southern hemisphere and the sky looks completely different. And we live in a world with light pollution, and you just really can't understand unless you've ever been to a place that has minimal light pollution of just how many stars are visible in the night sky and how they aid with navigation. And so understanding this was really important. Going along with this, too, is going to be better maps, better understanding of wind and ocean currents. Team that up with other technology like the spyglass or the telescope, better ship technology, etc. And you're really going to set up the Europeans having some big advantages and clear reasons why they're able to explore and expand during this time period. And here's one of the best of the maps at the time. And this is, and like astronomical stuff too. There you go. And then here's a really interesting painting. I think it's like I don't know if it's called like the Blessed Virgin of Mariners or something like that. I got it from Freemanpedia's site. I thought it was pretty dope, so I put it up there. Yeah, I said dope. I'm old. Leave me alone. Continuing on, historical developments that go with this. The developments included the production of new tools. I've kind of mentioned those a little bit, like lens technology, optics, etc., better sail technology, the compass, etc. Innovations in ship designs. There are 3 ships. You need to know what they are. You don't need to know the specifics of them other than that they come out of Europe. They're influenced by earlier periods because they have a lateen sail, and just know their names. And an improved understanding of regional wind and current patterns. Understanding that there is just a current in the south that's like, whoo. Understanding that you could get off the coast like near Mexico City, more Acapulco, and there are these currents that just take you straight to Manila. That's going to be really important whenever the Spanish discover that there are large reserves of silver in Potosí and Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico. And so they're going to be able to go to the Philippines, take that silver there, exchange it for goods, silk, etc., bring it back. And from one of our readings, you'll even see that there's an issue that there end up being Chinese barbers who came across the Manila Galleon via the Philippines as servants of like the Spaniards who were moving back and forth. And wouldn't you know it, now they're in Mexico City. And you wouldn't think that in the 1600s you'd have Chinese barbers in Mexico City, but you did. So the world is much more interconnected during this time period. It should be obvious why understanding wind and current patterns is going to help with navigation, exploration, and expansion. If it isn't, again, wow. But just in case you can't figure that out, better ships, understanding wind, knowing navigation better because of astronomical charts, new tools, and compasses, that's going to let you know where you're going, how to get back, how to get places quickly, and stave off scurvy. Yar. These are the 3 new ship designs you have to know from this time period. Caravel, carrack, flute. Generally know how to spell them. Know that in some ways they utilize lateen sails. Know that this is pretty much when you're thinking of European ships from this time period, you're thinking of these 3 designs, okay? You can pause it and read more if you want some specifics on there. Again, that's awesome from Freemanpedia. Thanks, Freeman. Moving on to topic 4.2, exploration causes and events. From 1450 to 1750. Well, all right. New learning objective time. Describe the role of states in the expansion of maritime exploration from 1450 to 1750. I really just need to leave that out because that's going to be what all of it is. Crazy days, kids. So let's take a guess. What do you think the role of the states in the expansion of maritime exploration was? I'll wait. I'm going to wait. That's right, you in the back. Yeah, you. Feel proud. You are correct. There's a large role that states played in the expansion of maritime exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator. Anyone? Am I right? Portugal? Cristobal Colombo? Huh? Trying to sail around the world that he thought was shaped like a pear. Ended up in the Caribbean. No? Well, who sent him? That's right, Ferdinand and Isabella. Yeah. The very same as the grandparents of Charles V. That's correct. Good job. This imaginary student I have just really, really remembers the random facts in my classroom, so that's great. I hope you're writing everything down. Look at this map. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my map lection's complete? Well, you'd be wrong. Here's another great graphic from Freemanpedia, and it tells you all the different mariners at the time and where they're going, but a lot of these you'll notice are coming out of Europe, and they aren't just raising the money on a... Oh, wait, I'm going to be one of those young teachers trying to be... Well, I'm not young anymore. Sadness. Anyway, one of those young teachers trying to be relevant and hip. Like, hey, they could have just used a Kickstarter, you know? Right, kids? Am I right? Snapchat? Anyway, they had to be sponsored by the government, right? Or they're going to have expeditions sent out that are part of the trading companies, but those trading companies will be chartered, granted monopolies from their own governments, many of the government officials holding like stock in these companies as well. So government sponsorship is extremely important. Let's learn about some very specific ones in the few regions that do a lot of exploration and colonizing from Europe at this time. So historical development, and you're going to have several examples that go with it. New state-supported transoceanic maritime exploration occurred in this period. So, exploring oceans and going across them, and it will be sponsored by the state. Here you have a painting of Prince Henry the Navigator, who was not a navigator and was also not named Henry. It's not a very Portuguese name. He was a prince, though. Let's talk about causes and effects here. Explain the economic causes and effects of maritime exploration by the various European states. So causes, what are the economic reasons that the Europeans are exploring and expanding? And what are the effects economically of this exploration and expansion? Remember, spice tea are themes: social, political interaction with the environment, cultural, economic, and technology and innovation are important to understand here because there are lots of motivations, causes for the expansion. Specifically culturally, we could look at, especially after the Reformation and the creation of the Society of Jesus, aka the Jesuits, that the Catholics are really trying to get more Catholics, right? And they're quite successful at that, as evidence of Latin America, the Philippines, parts of India and Africa that have large Catholic populations now today. They're quite effective. But that's not an economic cause. It's a great cause to write about, but if I ask you about an economic cause, you better tell me the primary economic cause, which was economic competition between the various European states wanting to get on that big old economic boy of trade, especially spices and the quote-unquote exotic exotic wares and goods of the Indian Ocean and just the quote-unquote Indies and the quote-unquote Orient. I'm just going to keep saying quote-unquote. I hope you're writing lots of quotes in your notes. Oh, snap. Did you notice the rhyme? All right, anyway. Let's get some specifics, some causes and effects. Specifically here, we're talking about the Portuguese. Portuguese development of maritime technology and navigational skills led to increased travel to and trade with Africa and Asia and resulted in the construction of a global trading post empire. A ton of information in this little historical development. Really a ton. So, first of all, you have to be able to tell me that trade and travel with Africa and Asia increased, right? And we know this is true, and this is going to be true with Prince Henry sponsoring voyages and exploration and all that of the different various Portuguese explorers, navigators, cartographers. It eventually leads to Diaz crossing or going around Africa, returning home, and then finally Vasco da Gama going around Africa, then going to India, returning home. The Portuguese now have a way to get to the Indian Ocean, and what do they start doing? They start colonizing various areas here. Whenever you colonize strategic choke points, other various places like islands, straits, coastal cities, and you do it so that you can have a way to maybe extract money from trade. You can't control all of it, but you can control some certain parts of it. And as you're sending out your expeditions, you have places to stop so you can resupply fuel, etc. That's a trading post empire. Many of the European powers will create a trading post empire, but the Portuguese is just so obviously a trading post empire that they're just the best example that I'm going to bring up for a trading post empire. I just roughly defined what a trading post empire is. We've talked about it a ton in our notes. It's in your AMSCO book. It's in your Strayer book. You should know what it is by now. If not, Google it. Could you prove that they had this increased travel and trade with Asia? Well, yeah, because they ended up conquering and controlling the Strait of Malacca, Goa, areas near Madagascar, the Azores, etc. Okay, and so what were the causes for this? They really were trying to get access to the trade of the Indies. They were also dealing with issues like not wanting to go through Italian and Ottoman middlemen, especially the Venetians and the Ottomans, and then at other times the Genoese and the Ottomans had this little monopoly going on in the Mediterranean. There were rivalries occurring, like the Omani rivalry. The Portuguese are actually going to fight a combo of Muslim and Venetian forces and defeat them here. And so multiple causes there. Economic. One is they want to cut out the middleman. Two is that they want to get access to all these trade goods. What are the effects of it? What are the effects of it? Well, the big effect, of course, is they create this big trading post empire. They're going to do some fantastic Iberian things like murdering a lot of people and cutting off their hands and doing all those classic feeding you to dogs things that the Iberians were kind of big on during this time period. So it was a crazy time, man. Crazy time. Let's learn about the other Iberian, the one who's going to clearly surpass the Spanish. Oh, I should probably mention, even though we'll get to this too, when the Portuguese are in the Indian Ocean and in areas of the Mediterranean and a little earlier than this time period, they're going to discover plantation labor, the use of African slave labor, and the production of sugar, and that's obviously going to have huge implications in their colonization of Peru and their exporting of kidnapped people in the form of slaves from West Africa, and then that's going to spread. Other Europeans will copy that in the northern part of South America and the Caribbean as well, so we might as well plant that flag right now so that you know that it's coming. Now the Spanish. The Spanish sponsorship of the voyages of Columbus and subsequent voyages, think like Magellan, across the Atlantic and Pacific dramatically increased European interest in transoceanic travel and trade. So, first you have to know about what they're talking about here. Ferdinand and Isabella, they send Columbus on an expedition to try and find a new route to the quote-unquote Indies. The Italian city-states have a monopoly on and Muslims as well have a monopoly on the Mediterranean. Overland routes are controlled by the Ottomans. Now the Portuguese have the around Africa route. Guess what? The Spanish are just going to go around the world. It's shaped like a pear. Don't you know? The Pacific Ocean's tiny. Turns out that's like Japan or something. No. Turns out Columbus ends up inadvertently discovering some rather large land masses, okay? And so this is going to dramatically increase the interest in transoceanic trade and travel, because we're going to see that many other European powers start trying to take colonies from all around here. So that's your cause. What are the reasons? Trying to basically get their new route. They're also dealing with the middleman. They're also now having to deal with not wanting to go through the Portuguese. And other causes for the Spanish is that they had just finished the Reconquista, right? The expulsion of the last Muslims from southern Spain around Cordoba. And so that same year is when Ferdinand and Isabella are going to send Columbus out on the expedition. You want to get even more detailed, but this isn't, AP Euro. You also have, the modern Spain coming together with Castile and Aragon kingdoms coming together as well. So there's lots of causes you could bring up too. One big economic cause overall that's also going to be fueling this is the economic philosophy of mercantilism, the idea that you set up colonies, and those colonies, you extract resources from them, and you make them buy your manufactured goods, the end result being that you get all the money in the world, which is gold and silver, and then you win the mercantilist prize of a trophy of some kind. Blah. So, wow, look at that. 20-ish minutes in, and we're already to topic 4.3. Now, I feel like I've talked about the Columbian Exchange to death now, but the Columbian Exchange, it's just always on the WHAP test. It just always is. Either it's like within a DBQ, an LEQ, an SAQ, a stimulus question, multiple parts of stimulus question. It's definitely within context if you have anything written for between Unit 3 and 4. And just the discovery of the Americas and the incorporation of the Americas into an entire world trading system, just ignore Australia and Antarctica for that one, it's going to have some profound effects. And so the Columbian Exchange is just so important. You really got to know it. New learning objective time. Explain the causes. That's pretty obvious what the causes are. It's whenever the Spanish and then other European groups ended up exploring, discovering, and expanding into the Americas. Explain the causes of the Columbian Exchange and its effects on the Eastern and Western hemispheres. Again, you need to know what the Columbian Exchange is. It's the mass exchange of goods, foods, plants, animals. I know those are foods too, but you get it. Plants, animals, diseases, culture, people, etc. between Afro-Eurasia, hello, and the Americas, hello. And back and forth and back and forth. There's going to be a lot of effects, some really big environmental and demographic effects. Some populations dwindle, some populations rise, some populations yes, but actually no. Okay. All right, so the historical development time, guys and gals. Siberian Huskies. The new connection between the Eastern and Western hemispheres resulted in the exchange of new plants, animals, and diseases known as the Columbian Exchange. So this is pretty much telling you what the Columbian Exchange is. It is in your best interest to memorize a few of the plants, animals, diseases that came from Afro-Eurasia to America and vice versa. So let's pick on a few. I think it's the ones that had the biggest economic, demographic, and environmental effects are the one we should focus on. First, let's talk about animals. Barnyard animals. Everything you think of that would be in a quintessential American farm, unless they're raising like turkeys or American bison, that stuff did not, or I guess llamas and alpacas, whatever. That stuff did not originate in the Americas. Pigs, sheep, goats, various cattle, donkeys, horses. And horses are also going to revolutionize things because they're going to revolutionize the life of Amerindians, especially in British North America. It becomes the United States. Native Americans, like horseback riding, will become very important, especially like in cultures where they do a lot of hunting. You can hunt off a horseback. It's going to have a profound effect on them. Also think about the things that are going to be grown. Let's look at British North America, right? Grains, soybeans, etc. The honeybee. But also think about the other things grown in South America, and the Caribbean and Mesoamerica. Coffee, citrus fruits, bananas, and then of course think about cotton and sugarcane. Tobacco would fit in this too, but tobacco comes from the Americas. But tobacco, sugar cane, and cotton all have the shared terribleness that they became part of the plantation economy and were largely grown, harvested, processed by African slaves, right? And so all of that could not have been possible had you not had the Columbian Exchange. Okay, what are some of the new plants and animals really from the old world? From the Americas going to Afro-Eurasia? Big ones are really the potato. Man, the potato. Every culture just adopts the potato. It grows really well in various soils. It's nutrient dense. It's a root vegetable. It's hardy until the potato famine. Too soon. Quinine to treat malaria. I mean, think about Italian food. And here's just a zoom in on that. You can pause it. Of course, it comes from my man Benjamin Freeman with all of his great graphics. The big one is the death. Oh, the death. Speaking of death, European colonization of the Americas led to the unintentional transfer of disease vectors, including mosquitoes and rats. Boy, we do love us some malaria. And the spread of diseases that were endemic in the Eastern Hemisphere, including smallpox, measles, and malaria. Some of these diseases substantially reduce the indigenous populations with catastrophic effects in many areas. The Great Dying, the smallpox that devastated parts of the Aztec world. Really remember that as much as guns, steel, horses, cannons, swords, the conquistador themselves, they do a lot of conquistadoring, conquering. But the really big conqueror of the New World is disease, right? There are various reasons, and I've gone into this in detail in my class. There's various reasons why it is that natives just don't have as good of immune systems to deal with these diseases. The obvious one being that they don't have many domesticated animals. Many of the Afro-Eurasian contagious diseases were diseases that affected domesticated animals and then jumped across that species barrier, like cowpox becoming smallpox, I think, and chicken pox, obviously from chicken, bird flu, swine flu, etc. Again, I've also said there's some evidence that they've looked at Siberians, which are like the parent generation to Native Americans, having different immune systems that just didn't respond as well to these types of illnesses. Probably more will be discovered about it as well, but some stats say, again, as high as 9 out of 10 Native Americans will die within 2 generations of meeting Europeans, right? And so this is going to be the great, quote-unquote, oh, I did it again. This will be the great conqueror of the New World. Yeah, guns are there, but, like, man, it's smallpox. Just look at that. That's a steep drop-off. Also, American foods became staple crops in various parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. We've talked about that, especially the potato. And then cash crops were grown primarily on plantations with coerced labor. What's the type of coerced labor we primarily see? That is chattel, Portuguese word for cattle, because they are treated in the most harsh conditions like livestock, children being property, never really granted freedom. In many instances, chattel slavery, coerced labor were exported mostly to Europe and the Middle East. So 2 historical developments here. The fact, like I talked about earlier, American food crops will become very, very, very popular in Afro-Eurasia. They'll have a population increase because of it. And then also, the cash crops were grown primarily with coerced labor. You're also using native labor here in Encomienda system, Hacienda system, etc., and exported to Europe and the Middle East. You also have Afro-Eurasian fruit trees, grains, sugar, and domesticated animals were brought to Europeans to the Americas, while other foods were brought by African slaves. You need to know the examples of these. The examples of the domesticated animals such as horses, pigs, and cattle. I really hope you appreciate the time I took to make a dairy cow color for cattle. It looks ridiculous, but what doesn't these days? Am I right? I am right. What about foods brought by African slaves? Okra and rice are the 2 that College Board wants you to know about. Obviously, rice doesn't originate in Africa, but it was there at the time. Slaves bring over okra and rice. These are specific examples of how the Columbian Exchange, specifically through the slave trade, is going to alter the food diet environment of the Americas. Something else I've already kind of mentioned here on this historical development, populations in Afro-Eurasia benefited nutritionally from the increased diversity of American food crops. So these crops that grew well, they were calorically dense, that could grow well in Afro-Eurasian soil because they utilized nutrients that, you know what, the word utilize is just terrible. Just never use it, because use is just a smaller word, and it's just much better. So let's start that over. And the crops used different nutrients in the soil, so they ended up growing really well. It supported larger populations, and the populations of parts of Afro-Eurasia went up, and their nutrition improved. All right. And there you have it, folks. Bye.